Hi everyone, and welcome to Community Connects. My name is Helen Banroka Balakjan. I am Yupik in Inubak. My dad is Mark John from Tuksuk Bay, and my mother is Sharon John, whose family is from the Unlikli area. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the youth programs coordinators for the Alaska Humanities Forum, and I'll be your facilitator this evening. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the traditional lands of the Dena'ina. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratitude and respect that we recognize the contributions and innovations and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina. I encourage you to let us know whose lands you're calling in from in the chat, and I will paste a link into the chat box right now if you are out of the Anchorage area and are unsure. Community Connects is a product of a coalition of community organizations. They are the Alaska Humanities Forum, Alaska Pacific University, the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, the Alaska Black Caucus, the Anchorage Public Library, Keys to Life, the Municipality of Anchorage, the Alaska Native Village Corporation Association, and Coffee and Folk. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us and to engage in conversation. This is the third and final conversation around resilience in our community. Today we are talking about elder resilience, and our panelists are Ken Hollander and Richard Seville and Tom Harris. I'm going to ask the panelists some questions, and afterwards we will have a question and answer period for the last 20 minutes of tonight's discussion. I encourage you to hold on to your questions until then, and please make use of the chat box to share any questions, comments, or resources. To our panel, could each of you please introduce yourself and tell us what resilience means to you? And we will start with Tom.
Nishis, it's you do a software take. You can tell from the language I'm Tlingit, and my great uncle's piece of art behind me with the house posts and longhouse. I'm originally from Ketchikan. I'm a member of the Tantakwan Tekwedi. We acknowledge that we are the grandchildren of the Dene. So I want to say a special greeting to my great aunt, Hallie Bissett. In addition, we celebrate that our participation on these lands we can document 14,000 years. So we know that Dene were here before us. Not that you're that old, Hallie, but in addition, we also have traveled through from what we can document today from the Baja California to the Sakhalin Islands. Resilience means we measure resilience in terms of time immemorial. It is a concept taught to us by our matrilineal heritage. And we've seen many things come and go. We record the Great Flood. And so these times, while challenging, are not the most challenging times that have been. So time is one that we all need to reach out to each other. You will hear us talk in ways of not competing interests, but completing interest, not dependent or independent, but interdependent. So we cast resilience as interdependent, completing interest decisions. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Next up, we have Ken.
Thank you, Helen. I'm Ken Hollander. I live on the Dena'ina land in Anchorage, and I've been a guest here since 1981. I came from Colorado, where I was born and raised. I've been working with older people since 1977, and when I was a young man. And now I am among the people that I work with. I'm a senior. recently I was the advocacy director for AARP Alaska for 8 years. And in September, I left there, and now I am working on a special project at the Alzheimer's Resource of Alaska. And I am here tonight, however, representing the LGBT elders from a group called SAGE Alaska, which is a program of identity, our LGBT nonprofit for Alaska. SAGE originally was an acronym for Services and Advocacy for GLBT Elders. And so while its branding has somewhat changed, to me, it still resonates that the experience of growing up and living life as a gay man has taught me, I think, a lot about resilience, particularly in the notion that people in my generation and above have really lived through almost all of the time of oppression, of going from illegal or mentally ill, all the way till the current time when we have laws that support people who are LGBT, but also we are seeing laws that are being proposed in opposition to LGBT, and particularly the transgender community right now. So in terms of the arcs of history, this is an issue that seems to come and go. I don't ever consider it resolved. And therefore, there's a real need to be resilient and to be able to maintain something of a homeostasis when everything around you is fluctuating in turmoil. So I see resilience really as something that comes from an inner locus of control, which is me as unique, but also then connected to the things that are outside of me, which I have no control over, but which I depend on and which oftentimes depend on me. So I agree with Tom that there's an interplay of interconnectivity that is related to resilience, and but it, to me, it is the ability to withstand and to live through things that are challenging throughout the course of our lives as an individual and as a community.
Last but not least, we have Richard.
Hi, thank you. Richard Seville. I moved up here from Tacoma, Washington when I was 6 years old in 1980. So I've been a guest of the Denina land since then. And I can't imagine living in another state. I've been around quite a few places, and this seems to be the place for me. I have been in and around the assisted living field, both with individuals who have developmental disabilities and then with the elderly for about 30 years, the last 12 of which I've been the administrator at the Anchorage Pioneers Home. I've seen, the generations that we have going through there now. The average age is about 88. So, and when I started, it was probably a little younger, but we have a lot of folks from the World War II generation. Not so much that fought anymore, but that definitely lived through that time as probably teenagers. And to think of what they've seen in their time on this earth is pretty, in what they've lived through and how resilient they've had to be to get to where they are today is amazing to me. And I learn new things from them every day. I think that resiliency is being able to continue to live your life and attain your goals, work towards your goals, no matter what the outside world's throwing at you. Your ability to stay positive through adversity. I was watching a TV show the other day, and I'm not a very poetic person, but one of the characters said, and I honestly don't remember the context this was in, but it seemed to me a good definition of resiliency is the ability to believe in the coming day, even in the bleakest dawn. And I think that the elders at the Pioneer Home have seen a number of different bleak dawns in their time. Just most recently, even with COVID, but they've been through a lot of things. And so I think, the ability to continue to live and strive for your goals and stay positive and fight for the things you believe in the face of that adversity and those negative things pointing at you and coming after you. I think that's what resiliency is to me.
I think everybody touched on this a little bit in their introductions, but our next question is, what impacts of COVID-19 have you seen in your community? And we'll start with Ken.
We're still seeing it. This is an ordeal, isn't it? To go through something that has lasted so long and has affected everyone in some way or another. I don't know of anything else really that has been such a shared experience around the world, and certainly within our own communities here in my lifetime. And I got to be 73 thinking, well, I've almost made it. And then all of a sudden this happened. And I thought, oh gosh, there's still more to do. And maybe that's what, really resilience is, especially in later life, is to be able to continue to adapt and to change with the things that are happening outside of ourselves. Prior to this, our SAGE group had been forming since 2016, a group of older LGBT individuals through various types of activities that were social, that sought to bring our community together and to address common interests and common concerns that we have, to engage in advocacy and just to get to know one another, and certainly also to try to provide information and education to the community around us that someday might, like in Richard's case, be responsible for caring for us. And so we were well on the way. And then COVID came and took away all those opportunities to see one another. And I know for me I experienced that as a tremendous loss. And of course, it wasn't simply the gay community that I was thinking of, but it was my church family, it was my real family, it was my friends and associates, my work family. We were all separated, and pretty soon we were all pixels, like we are tonight, on a computer screen. And there were times when, because I was working from home and spending a lot of time on Zoom, that even when we would have our social time on Saturday mornings, I just couldn't bear to go on a computer again. And I found myself, even though I wanted to be part of a discussion and to see my friends, it was still a computer that I was relating to. And so I began to have sort of a feeling of fatigue from just the experience of being separate. But I literally felt like I had lost a whole community all at once. And I think particularly for our gay community, our LGBT community, we have historically felt like we had to be, as the famous metaphor of being in a closet. And most of us in our generation grew up where that was literally true. We had to hide, we had to inhabit dark spaces and be away from the light because that was dangerous to be exposed. And so our building a sense of community has been very, very important, and sometimes still very sequestered from the rest of community life, not well integrated. It's changing and getting better, but it's certainly not there yet. I'm married, my husband and I, but you know, we still would not walk down Fifth Avenue holding each other's hands. That would be unthinkable to me to do that. And I know that would be true for many LGBT elders. So the pandemic has definitely affected our community. And I've noticed that our Zoom calls, our social calls, are not as large as when we used to gather in person. So we've lost connectivity with some, and I think we're going to have to rebuild that again once we have the opportunity to be in touch with one another.
Next up, we'll hear from Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Ken, it's interesting to hear you talk about relating to a computer, because I feel like with our elders at the Pioneers Home, it was either a computer or through a window, you know, and you know, most of them have trouble seeing. They certainly don't understand technology, not even the ways that I would, and I'm, you know, not anywhere near their age, but I still have trouble myself. I had to figure out how to change the name on this from my wife's name to my name because this is her computer. So, and if I have trouble with that, I can't imagine what someone who's 88 or 90 is trying to figure out. So, I think that was definitely one of the probably the largest impact on our community was the inability to have that family contact. And it was heartbreaking to have to talk to families and our elders and say, I'm sorry, you know, we're locking our doors and we just can't let you in. And so we had to really work hard to find different ways for them to connect, whether, and it ended up being a lot through a computer, the best we could, or, you know, through a huge big screen TV that they could actually see versus a small computer screen or an iPad screen or something like that. But I think, you know, the flip side of that is that what I learned in looking at our community and dealing with these loss of contacts is the immense amount of, you know, support from the families that were out there. So I think that that really, in some ways, brought our community together, as opposed to tearing it apart. You know, we lost one area, but we discovered another. And I don't think that any of us really understood, us being the staff at the home. You know how important family contact is, but you take it for granted. I mean, I certainly did. And I think that our staff did. and it's not a good or bad. It's just, it was never an issue. You know, hey, if you want to come see your mom or dad, come on in. We don't even really have visiting hours. It didn't matter. You just come see your mom or your friend or whoever, whenever you want to come by. It's great. And all of a sudden that's all shut down. And so I really, you know, it made me realize that we took that kind of contact and those relationships for granted a little bit, even though we thought we supported them. You know, now that we see how bad it can be, we've really learned a lot in that area. I think that, you know, it's been, and now that we're opening back up and having visitors in again, it's been amazing. You know, you don't necessarily think about, well, I don't know, maybe you do. Maybe you've had the same issue where you couldn't see your mom or dad for the last year. You couldn't give your mom a hug, or you know, watch a game with your mom or your dad, or whatever it might be that you guys did before COVID. And so to be able to have those things start happening again is really, it's just been heartwarming to see that people have come through it and everybody is okay. You know, we're coming through it okay. I think it's been difficult, but again, I think it's just a testament to go back to the theme of that generation's resiliency and that they've been through so much that a lot of this, although it was difficult on some, I was honestly pretty shocked how well they weathered it. Probably better than I would have. If I had to work from home for the last year, I probably would have gone crazy. I'm just thankful I could keep going into work. So yeah, I think we've seen both positive and negative impacts in our community. We've looked for positive, we've sought positives out, because I think that's something we've had to do to kind of get through this last year with our heads up.
And we'll hear from Tom now.
Thank you. In defining community, I need to explain that I'm also the CEO for the Village Corporation in Wasilla. I'm the past president of the Alaska Village Initiatives, which is a statewide organization of village corporations and tribes. So that definition of community is expanded by that concept. In addition, Connect, because of its location in the Wasilla area, it ends up being an area where many rural community members live. When ANCSA was passed, there were only 28 individuals left to form a corporation out of tens of thousands that previously lived there. We're now at a point where we've got 15,000 Alaska Natives living in the area, and this is we all often hear what's happening and who's connected and what's going on. We've said farewell to a number of our members, and that issue of community also involves family members outside. But it's also given us, every challenge brings opportunity, and so this was my opportunity to learn how to use Zoom. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm a little thin on top, and I've made a terrible discovery that hair is really memory sticks, and I'm really losing mine. And I'm really worried about you, Richard. So I expect to live in your place one day, so I hope you're around to remember me.
Oh, I'm sure I'll be around. There's a little more here than it looks like. This
All
is
right.
voluntary, so yeah.
All right, very good. So those of you who know me know that I switched to long-term memory. So that said, we do have to remember that elders before us have gone through challenges, and while it's not been worldwide like this, we have some tools that they didn't have. We have this opportunity to at least see each other, and I agree with Ken. Looking at another screen is not my favorite. I'd rather share a shot of Diet Coke on the rocks with someone than I would share a screen with them. But that said, it's also caused us to reach out to members of our extended family across the nation, in some cases across the world, and say, how are you? And I hope you're doing well. So a lot of those have happened. My work with the corporations has been in community development. So during this time, it feels like this has been one long winter. In winter, you plan about you're going to do something, but you don't really get anything done. You just plan until as soon as that snow is gone, like now. And I'm so relieved to see the snow gone, and we actually get out and make things better for our extended community. So that opportunity is now upon us, and I'm grateful for the shots that I've received. I'm grateful for the family that lives with me, and the extended family. So while I live in the village of Los Anchorage, I communicate often with my village of Saxman, Alaska, and check on how things are going with relatives there, as I was this afternoon just prior to this call. With that, it also means a time for more prayer and thankfulness for what we have, and pray for the care of those that we long to hug but at this point have not been able to see. So that said, I'm sure all community members have similar stories where we're anxious to see each other again and give a warm hug and not an elbow. So who knew that that would be the formal greeting for each other, to give each other the elbow. So with that, thank you, Helen.
Our next question is, how have you seen communities come together in the face of the pandemic or other challenges? And we'll start with Richard.
All right, thanks, Alan. Yeah, I think this could have been a really huge opportunity for the community to fall apart and kind of turn on each other. And I think that from my perspective at the Pioneers Home, exactly the opposite happened. I was just absolutely amazed at the support that we received from the Anchorage community as a whole. We had hundreds of masks donated. We've had flowers donated. We've had people calling, wanting to volunteer any way that they could, knowing they couldn't come in the home. But, you know, we've had folks work on putting, you know, activity books together. And it's just been an absolute outpouring of support from the community at large. And then with our families, who we, like I said earlier, basically had to lock the door and tell them they couldn't come in, that could have gone so far south that it wouldn't have even been funny. And instead, they all were uber supportive. Just anything you need, you let us know. You know, we're happy that you're caring for our mom or dad. We thank you. There was great recognition on the family's part. I think that, you know, and especially our CNAs and our nurses, when we had our outbreaks, we had 2 pretty good outbreaks of COVID in the building, and, you know, they're coming to work every day, putting their health in danger with their, you know, going home to see their families, putting them in danger, you know, but coming to work every day and loving the elders and doing their jobs above and beyond what I could even have ever imagined. So I think that between the community at large and the families and our staff going above and beyond, and how all of those interactions played off of each other. We had a group of family members before Christmas organized, really it was 2 family members organized a larger group to put up a big thank you banner outside the building, and the families came by and signed it. They bought gift cards for all the staff. One afternoon, they came and did some socially distant Christmas caroling around the building for everybody. And there were a whole lot of tears that day, especially from the staff, just feeling the love of the community. And so I think that it brought out the best of the community in some ways, in those kinds of ways. And it made me feel happy to be a part of that community, and know that when it hits the fan, so to speak, that there's support out there. And so, yeah, I think that it really did, in so many ways, we've grown from this through the adversity.
Next, we'll hear from Tom.
Thank you. I would agree with Richard. In this particular case, our communities come together in a number of ways. We've grown a lot closer to our tribe. We were already close to Connect Tribe, and also to others. One of the things we did was to start looking at solutions. Food security became an issue, and not only, and we're, like it or not, our generation is a generation that has become a generation of convenience. And it was easy to stop and pick up that Diet Coke or whatever from the grocery store. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was a real shortage of Diet Coke this year. And Diet Coke has doubled in price over what it was before this all started. So, and I know you all love Diet Coke as much as I do. But that said, the issue is preparing, and how do we prepare for events? So not only for ourselves, but for the rest of our community. And as Richard said, the community came together to help in areas to make certain that needs of elders and others were met. I'm anxious that we be mindful. You've heard me say the word interdependent, and real briefly, dependent is what we all grow out of as children. We become independent to take care of ourselves, but we really don't become adults in the biblical sense until we learn to care for others. And in that process, we become mature. And there's been a lot of maturity that's occurred as a result of this when we look around and see who others who are in harm's way. It also means that we are also preparing for the future. We have to prepare for the valley to continue to grow and to have some of the largest elder communities in the state. And as a result, we're doing things such as having microgrids planned for that community. So if there's an earthquake or something, that they will be safe. We are looking at other areas that we can provide for the long-term survival of our community. So as a result of this, and we've seen others reach out to us. I know that the government's also reaching out in ways trying to anticipate. We've all seen during this time the rise of China, and we can choose to look at them as competing interests, or we can choose to look at them as completing interests. Most of us are attending this meeting by virtue of the fact that China manufactured something and it's sitting in front of us right now. So in that way, they are a completing interest. So reaching out and understanding more about them. It's more than just the community that's next to me. It's part of the worldwide community that I'm a part of, and trying to look for leadership who also has that interdependent, completing interest in mind. In that way, not only we as individuals mature, but our community matures as well as we look out for each other. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Ken.
So lots to think about from both of you, Tom and Richard. As far as the gay community is concerned, and when I say gay, I mean LGBT. I'm gay, so I always sort of frame that around my own experience. But being inclusive, there is a growing list of letters that we are now using, and so LGBTQ and A, and some of them I don't even know what they are. But I do know that our community has been through this before. We were not part of a pandemic, but we were part of an epidemic that killed thousands of our community. I personally knew about 40 people in my own personal sphere of relationships who died of AIDS back in the 80s and 90s, including my own partner. And I remember during that time, we felt abandoned, and there was not an acknowledgement on the part of government, often by healthcare workers who were afraid of us, and certainly family members, extended family members, or people that we were acquainted with. I think we felt the effects of terrible isolation related to this terrible disease that still is causing problems. And one of the things we learned during that time, because we were kind of on our own, there was no government help. There were not, programs that helped us. We had to turn to one another within our community, this interdependence. And I think in some ways, that experience drew us all together like nothing had ever done before, out of necessity. But, there was, in the midst of all this grief, there was an emergence of something very precious and intimate. And I think something that has persisted since that time, for those of us who have the recollection of those days. I know that it's important for elders to be storytellers, because I know that many younger LGBT young people are, when they think about AIDS, it's an abstract. It's something they've heard about, but even though they may be at risk, it's not immediate to them like it was to us. And so it's important that, elders help other generations to understand how we manage through hard times. I think this is an aspect of resilience that we can take lessons from and be able to learn for ourselves and be able to help to share that for the benefit of those who come after. I know that when this pandemic started, I turned to literature and tried to find out what it was like back in the Middle Ages when the bubonic plague happened. I read some about the flu epidemic in the early 1900s, and I was very curious about the after effects, and it seemed like in each of those instances there was a rebirth that came out of great sorrow. And so I think in some ways resilience and bereavement or loss and grief are intimately linked, that as we experience hardship, we also tap into something much, much stronger within ourselves and within our relationships with one another. I know that during this time, not only did we have this pandemic, but for me personally, and I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but for me personally, the events in our country, in the politics, and issues around the world just seemed so tense. And it made the experience of COVID almost seem like it was incidental to some of the things that were happening dramatically before our eyes, and terrifying. And so, it felt like at the same time we were having to depend on one another, we were also being torn apart. And right now I am so tired of hearing about people being shot by police and brutalized by what seems such a senseless form of privilege. And I think that's a lesson out of this COVID that we also need to take, is how much we really depend on each other, and the fundamental humanity that we all share, that no one is experiencing this any differently than anyone else. It's a universal thing. We are all human beings, life and death, loss and gain, missing our families. There's nobody that doesn't have those kinds of feelings, whether they're migrant children crossing a border, or people in other countries who are at war and being bombed, or people in our own cities who have had to endure prejudice and occupation by hostile forces for hundreds of years. You know, it has opened my eyes and my appreciation so much. I think particularly living here in Alaska. And, you know, when I grew up in public schools in Denver, I had the same sort of white history that everybody else did. And it's taken me time to really understand what it must be like for an invasion of your heritage, of your land. And I'm amused when we think about Seward's Day and how somehow we celebrate the purchase of Alaska from Russia, who itself was an invasion into these lands. And all I can do as a consequence, having learned all this, is to honor the elders and the generations that have come before and who have consequently taught me. And I'm very grateful for that. I think that in my experience of this, I will have grown personally and my desire to be an advocate for equity in our lives certainly has grown during this time. And I'm all I can say is I'm just so grateful for it, and I appreciate all the people around me in this great land that we live in.
Thank you all for your answers so far. We've talked about it some, but what lessons are you taking with you, and what is your community doing now that will make it more resilient 5-10 years later down the road? And we'll start with Tom.
She's one of the biggest lessons we have is that we are all related, and in particular, I'm going to speak to the tribes of Ish. How many of you are members of the tribes of Ish? You know what I mean by the tribes of Ish? You know, English, Irish, Scottish. Yes, and oh, my favorite, the breakfast tribe, the Danish. My grandmother had 18 children, but by the time I came along, there was not a single functioning family unit left. You know the family name is the Tongass National Forest was named after them. Growing up in that situation from birth to graduation, changing homes 22 times, she was adamant about me understanding that I was not to hate the tribes of Ish as they came here. She was adamant that I understand that these are our distant relatives, that the tribes of Ish are really tribal people who forgot who they were. So I greatly appreciate Ken's comments about the elders' teaching. And Richard, you have an enormous challenge in capturing the lessons that so many elders have to teach. And I would love to share those lessons. I'm looking for opportunities to. So there's an opportunity to record an elder talking about old times. You have an enormous library there. As we talk about it, and I jokingly said about the tribes of Ish, but the tribes of Ish and Tlingit, Ish is the father's side. Ish happens to be the Hebrew name for Adam. And prior to following the father's side, becoming patrilineal, we recognize that the tribes of Europe were really matrilineal. And we look at the history of England and see so many connections there that we recognize in Tlingit. That's why we recognize why so many Scotch-Irish and English came to Alaska and married in. My last name, Harris, is Scotch-Irish. And it was from those that our elders were recognizing they were still carrying some of the matrilineal legends and in history. it's in that history that we recognize really how close we are, and that we have no right to put each other in harm's way. You've heard me talk about interdependent completing interest. In a viable village, viable community, it's not Democrats and Republicans. It's Democrats, Republicans, and the other. It's male, female, and the other. And God didn't create a two-legged stool, he created a three-legged stool. And sometimes we're on one side or another, but sometimes we have to be that bridge between parties. And this meeting that we're having is that bridge now. This is part of that healing process. These are the lessons I take, that I've got new friends to meet and another person to joke about not having enough memory sticks. So with that, as we come together, what is our community doing? You heard we talked about food security. We're very concerned about that for Alaska. We've just seen an enormous worldwide event. And yes, it threatened Diet Coke, but what else did it threaten? We are blessed to live in Alaska, 750,000 people or so. No one has access to more wildlife habitat than we do. Yet do we understand that no habitat in America has been as depleted as Alaska's? We celebrate the wildlife, but do we know that more wildlife was harvested within 50 miles of Washington, D.C. than was harvested in all of Alaska? And it's being managed as an independent competing interest, not independent completing interest. We know that it's easier today to catch a 46-pound king in New York State than it is in Southeast Alaska. We know today that the bag limit or catch limit for a king salmon today in Southeast Alaska is 1 salmon. The bag limit in Indiana, king salmon, is 5 salmon. And I urge you to look at this yourself. And these are issues of resilience that if we got into a food shortage, could be very challenging for all of us. And so we're looking to rebuild our ability to grow our own food, to not grow just enough for us, but to grow enough for neighbors. And to, more than that, teach. And Richard, you've got people who've been through hard times, and they know a lot of lessons that we need to learn again today. That gave you an example of how we're connected. That picture you see behind me, that totem house, there's a version of this that is in Formosa, Taiwan. If you look up the Formosa, Taiwan in the Sun Moon Park there, you will see that a version of that. There's another version of this in Gleasenkirchen, Germany. Full-size version. And it's there because those ancients recognized the relationship we all have. And I urge us all to, before we start throwing rocks at each other, to look for those opportunities. And one of the issues of completing interest versus competing interest, if I'm going after you at competing interest, I look at what's different about you than me. If I'm going after completing interest, I look about the fact that Richard and I are losing memory sticks. And we need to look at those relationships and how we are more alike than how we are different. The fact that we're all at this meeting means there's something in common with all of us. And I'm very grateful to have been invited to this event. And with that, I'll say thank you, Helen.
Next, we'll hear from Ken.
I think I already went on this. What was the question again?
What lessons are you taking? I've typed this out weird. What lessons are you taking with you? What is your community doing now that will make it more resilient 5-10 years down the road? And I think you did touch on it in your last answer, but did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I will. This was a real interesting thing to me. One of the things that I was working on when I was at AARP I had become acquainted, interestingly, it is called the village to village movement. It's not, the village is not taken from the notion of villages in Alaska. It actually started in Boston, but it has spread across the lower 48 as a means of connecting elders with the kinds of supports that they need to remain independent in their own homes. And the principle is that fundamentally, everything we need is right under our nose if we just organize it. And so when I was at AARP, I began working on this and bringing people together here in Anchorage with the idea of creating a formal a village based on volunteers, based on, you know, people down the street who are my neighbors have cars and they're going to the store and they can help me who can't drive anymore, who needs to get groceries and so on. And I can teach piano lessons for them in exchange for somebody to shovel my snow. And by organizing all that, we find that within our neighborhood community, we have completeness. And so what happened with the pandemic was that it shut that whole thing down. And ultimately, I left AARP and that whole project kind of went away. But I observed that actually our community sort of did it naturally anyway. And just like Richard was saying, you know, people were making masks and making sure that neighbors had food, or that people were able to get health care when they needed it, that people were reaching out to people that might be lonely and isolated to make sure that they weren't forgotten. And I really saw that there was a sort of natural community that came out of this this pandemic. And I think that's also true in our LGBT community as well. In spite of the fact that, you know, we've been limited to Zoom meetings, we have enjoyed some new members who have come to be part of this community. And, you know, I started a new job, and actually yesterday I had to go out to our Wasilla office, and I actually met two of our staff members who I've been working there now for 6 months, and this was the first time I ever met them face to face. And I thought, wow, you know, you actually exist. You're a real person. You're not just a pixel. And it was such a joy to see people again. So I think one of the things that we're going to take from this is how important our human-to-human contact really is. Every Sunday during this time, I'm a piano player, and I have for a long time been a church accompanist. But our church went to Zoom, and so it has only been me and the choir director in the church sanctuary this whole time since last March, a year ago, and that was so that we could coordinate singing and accompanying for everybody else. And one day I turned to her and I said, you know, other than my husband and close family, you're my most significant other, because you're the only person I see in face to face. And she laughed about that. But it was really true, you know, that sense of connection and of human contact and shared enterprise has become very important. As well as, I think, in that, for me anyway, tapping into something very spiritual that, you know, as we have witnessed so many people, 500,000 people in our country that have died, and working in the field of aging, I'm no stranger to, you know, what death means and what a natural sort of sequence of life it is. But it's hard. It's hard being a survivor. It's hard being left behind. and to be bereaved and to experience that sense of being alone again from that person. But in that, I think, is an appreciation of, again, of our humanity and our connection, not just with one another face to face or on Zoom, but for generations. And I think our LGBT community has begun through our elder programs to really look back and think back to the 50s or before Stonewall, or before all these different pieces of legislation that made discrimination less possible and marriage possible. We have been through all of those things, and we look forward now as a community of being able to join hands and advocate not only on our own behalf, but on behalf of others who are similarly marginalized or disadvantaged within the multiple systems we have in this country. And I think that's one of the lessons that I will take, that I think our community will take, is a renewed determination to be connected and to value that in a way we never really could have without this experience of COVID.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you about meeting a bunch of coworkers for the first time. I did that on Friday, and that was a very lovely experience. But next we'll hear from Richard.
Yeah, like I said, I've been lucky enough to at least been able to go into work every day. And so I haven't experienced the work from home for a year, but I know my wife has had to do that. And it's been a challenge for her. And she also started a new job during COVID. So she still hasn't met most of her coworkers in person yet. So I'm waiting for that day too. I'm sure it'll be, I'm sure it'll be a good conversation piece over at the dinner table. I think, Ken, something you said about, the other things going on in the world and in our country during COVID, specifically the political climate and the, just the kind of, everybody seems to be so at each other's, throats for their perspectives. And I think that something that COVID has shown me is that, and Tom, this kind of goes to what you were talking about as well, that if we focus on the things that we have in common, we can accomplish great things. And I think that that's a lesson that we should all think about and kind of meditate on, if you will, that focus on the things that we have in common instead of what makes us different, because that will help you get through the tough times. I'm absolutely positive that there are many competing political views in the Pioneer Home, both from their staff and the people that live there and the families, but everybody was able to come together and support each other in the face of this common enemy. And so I think that that's a huge lesson that I will take from this. I think, and before I go on, I think I want to mention and honor and be mindful that we did lose 5 elders to COVID at the Pioneers Home. And so I don't want to forget that or, dishonor them by not at least mentioning that. We're laughing a little bit and talking about things, but that was really difficult thing for our staff to deal with. And so I do want to honor them by at least mentioning them in this conversation. And so the other thing that I just want to kind of put out there that we focused on a lot in the Pioneers Home as far as getting through this was looking for positive things. And it could be something very small. A lot of times it was something that normally wouldn't have been positive, but given the perspective of our situation, it was. And so, an example would be, we were dealing with our 2 outbreaks and we were testing everybody in the building through every 3 days, praying that there were no more positives, but inevitably you get another positive. But one of the positive things we can take out of that is, like so someone would test positive newly, and we would look at it and say, okay, well, at least that person who's positive is still in this area where we know our positive cases are, and it hasn't spread to a different part of the building. And so we're doing good things. We can't necessarily stop it from spreading in that area from elder to elder, especially when they have dementia and they just don't understand, what's going on or how to distance or stay away from each other. But the things that we've put in place, the practices that we've put in place, we don't have any staff becoming positive. So what you're doing is working. The positive cases we have are staying in this one area. So what we're doing is working. And so finding positive things like that to kind of focus on, it really was important for us to get through some of the dark days, because about early mid-December, things were pretty bleak for us. I mean, at least for me, and I was struggling going to work and keeping that positive face to as a leader in the home and trying to keep people on the same page and doing good things. And so I think that was something that helped me. And I think that that's something that I will take, those lessons of seeking positivity forward for the rest of my life. And our community will take that forward as well, I hope, is that, when I'm long gone, hopefully there will still be some younger staff that are working there that remember how this all went down, and that, how our community came together, worked together, and stayed as positive as we could through it. So yeah, I think those are a couple of lessons I think I will definitely take forward.
Brianna, thank you guys. Our next question is, how can people here support your work or the work that your community is doing? And we'll start with Ken.
One of the things that I think about when I listen tonight, and even as I've been talking, is our LGBT community looks like everybody on this call, and looks like everybody living in a village, looks like everybody that lives in the Pioneer Home, looks like everybody that shops at Cars and Fred Meyer. And we are everywhere, and we are part of everybody's community. And for some, that's not even known, because people feel like that's something they have to keep private. I'm hopeful that, one of the lessons that we will have learned is how important it is to live a life of honesty and openness without fear, and knowing that there's a community around us that holds us up and supports us. What we've been trying to do in our SAGE work is to provide understanding, just like I have been so appreciative of the new understandings that I have been gaining over the past number of years about what it's like to be Black in America, or what it's like to be an Alaska Native, or a Native American, or an Asian. And I'm one of those issues. I'm Swedish. So even that is something I have to reckon with. And when it comes down to it, to be able to live with that sort of, I guess, integrity and openness with confidence is really a sign of resilience. And it's also a source of joy to be real and understood by another person, and to embrace that other person's understanding and acceptance is really a source of great happiness and joy. So as we go forward, I think our community cherishes when people affirm us, when people respect the troubles that we've gone through, whether it's been AIDS or years of being mentally ill or illegal, and prohibited from loving someone. That kind of affirmation from our community means a lot. I'm very grateful to be representing our community on this conversation. And I appreciate being invited and you asking that question. We have now just we have a new headquarters at Identity where this program originates from, over on Fireweed and Arctic. People are welcome to learn more about Identity. Identity has also just in the past week opened a new LGBT health clinic, which is kind of a new iteration or a component of Full Spectrum Health on Denali and Northern Lights in the Stone Soup Group building. And so recognizing the things that our community is able to contribute back to our larger community through the arts, through our volunteer work, through all the different things that, like I say, we are part of every one of your communities and families. That kind of affirmation, we are glad to give back. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Richard.
Could you repeat the question, Helen? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. The question is, how can people here support your work or the work that your community is doing?
Yeah, I think, the community, like I have spoken about earlier, has been so supportive of us in the home over the last year. I think that we have a huge number of volunteer opportunities if people are interested in volunteering, from individuals to groups. We're an Eden home called Eden Philosophy, which in a nutshell brings generations together. So intergenerational contact's very important. So we really love it when the kids can come in, and we know right now that that's kind of been on pause, obviously, and probably will be until we can get the kids vaccinated as well. But so definitely reach out if you're interested in volunteering. Our elders love the kids coming through. We have different groups volunteer every year in many different ways. So if it's something that you're interested in, we can find something for you to do with our elders for sure. We've had, Tom, I think you mentioned recording histories, and that's something that we kind of work on from time to time. It probably hasn't, certainly over the last year, gotten the attention we would want it to have, but we have had volunteers in the past come in and actually sit down with family permission, and sometimes with families involved as well, and record some oral histories of the elders that live in the home. And those are amazing interviews to be a part of and to listen to. And so if anybody's interested in that, that would be amazing. We definitely, re-record it for the family, so that they have that, and the future generations have that story from their elders to listen to or to point to. So we're definitely interested in keeping that program going, or kind of getting it started up again. So yeah, and I think, otherwise, just, when you see us, wave and smile, and our elders love to, walk around the block. If you're coming by and you see somebody, feel free to stop by and chat with them outside. And they're very, they're always looking for a conversation. Most of them are. So coffee and a talk, Yeah. So.
Next, we'll hear from Tom.
Thank you for that, Richard. I would recommend and encourage the possibility of you starting a YouTube streaming channel for those elders. They've got stories, and we won't know the connections until we try to make those connections.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks, Tom.
And what we are doing, part of what we are doing is trying to make our community more resilient and sharing that information. As an example, we're building a elders community around Cottonwood Creek and we're going to make it a microgrid. And the reason why we're making it a microgrid is that we can provide those homes for a lot less money. Most recently, we helped the Baxter Assisted Living community get off the grid. That building now is off the grid, and there are several others that are coming off the grid as a method of carbon sequestration, reducing energy costs for that community. We're sharing this information with others who want to do the same thing, and we're not the only ones out there. There are several others doing it, and so we have an energy community doing that. We're also looking at food security, and both in restoring the ancient practice of reseeding rivers. And I'm an elder now, but I remember my elders saying 90% of the salmon they knew are gone. I'm their age, and 90% of the salmon I knew are gone. Same with the wildlife. 97% of the moose harvest out of the Kenai Peninsula is gone since Hammond left office. And we don't realize this is happening, but it is all around us. And we can't blame it on a mining company or an oil company. It's how we're managing, and we're anxious that our extended community understand that if we work together, these aren't competing interests, these are completing interests. No state should produce more wildlife foods than we. And they're not made to hoard, they're made to share. That was the whole idea. And you can't have a potlatch unless you've got food to share. So let's have a big potlatch together and share not only food, but other treasures that we have, most of them, which is our friendship. And as we talk about this, and in the Tlingit community, we have typically the Raven and the Eagle clans, but there was always another. And that other helped build peace between, if there was war, if there was battles. So in the LGBT community, you are the other. And we have celebrated them in the past. Like many of the Western cultures, it was demonized, and when it need not be. These were individuals with different gifts, special gifts. As we go through this process, one of the things we can do is care for each other, be gentle with each other, recognize the things we have in common. And we've gone through a very hostile political era, and as a community, please understand that these events that we have gone through typically are meant to prepare us for something more significant. And on the horizon, those of us who have been taught to think interdependently and completing interest are looking over the horizon and seeing this come. And it's coming to this community, and this community being the United States, North America. As a child, I remember going to school and hearing adults saying, why can't those Chinese be more like us? Well, guess what? We've got 1.4 billion Chinese becoming more like us every single day. And the question is, are we prepared? All you have to do is look on YouTube and you see phenomenal growth. And we as a community are largely unprepared for that. So, and most of us don't know that today that community is sending out half the population of the United States out in as tourists every single year. And it's only a matter of time before they are here. And the hope is that we will be prepared. And what better way to prepare than by preparing with each other? And I encourage all of us to look at that opportunity. And again, Helen, I thank you for this opportunity to share and to learn and meet new friends, Richard and Ken. And we have something now to have a cup of coffee over, Diet Coke on my part. So, and thank you, Helen, for that. And thank you, Ken, and thank you, Richard.
Our next question is, what are you hopeful about? And I think everybody's touched on this a little bit, but please add more. Richard, you're up first.
I think that I'm hopeful that, and I touched on this a little bit the last question, just that having gone through this and recognizing that we all do have commonalities, and that if we can focus on those, we can get past these other difficulties that are going on. I think that if we can just focus, it's going to sound kind of kumbaya, but I mean, if we can focus on loving one another and stop trying to fight each other about everything, recognize that we have differences, but focus on the commonalities, I think that we could really move forward in a meaningful way. I'm also hopeful that we never have another COVID-19 or similar pandemic or situation. I realize that that's naive. Of course, something like this will come up again, and we'll have to come together and work through it. But hopefully that fight will come with my kids' generation or my grandkids' generation, and we can take a break for a while. But be sure that the stories are passed on so that they know how we dealt with it. I'm hopeful that more immediately that we are able to continue to educate folks regarding COVID, to get the vaccine, so that we can open back up the way that we want to and continue to kind of live our lives freely as we want to, and keep those family connections coming back into the Pioneers home. And I'm hopeful that the lessons that we've learned from this past year get recorded somehow. We need to keep talking about it. We need to be sure that our kids know about it, and so that they can learn from us and learn from history. And I'm a history major, actually, so don't even ask how that led to me being the administrator of the Pioneers home. But so I'm a big believer in learning from history and recording history. So hopefully the lessons we're talking about today and that everyone else has learned will not be forgotten.
Next up is Tom.
And the question again?
What are you hopeful about?
I'm hopeful that Richard never gives up his love of history, and that he uses the huge library that he has to memorialize it in YouTube. I'm hopeful. I'm wanting to hear all the Tribes of Ish stories. And behind me, and I'll step out of the way, you see a totem house that is in Gleasenkirchen, Germany. And in the center of that center pole is a story of how to care for the wildlife in the recede rivers. We know that story is 14,000 years old. And that story is of a woman. As we were in these lands, we also traded with the Lutic, Yupik, and Inuit, and Inupiaq. And so we know that they were here as well. And if they were here, so were all of you. It's time to look back and remember who we are, remember where we come from, and our reason for caring for each other. We have a responsibility not to put each other in harm's way. And this is what our matriarchs would have wanted. Our encouragement and what we're hoping for is, as we prepare for the future, we prepare together. And society of preppers, being alone. That's not a future that I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of a large community that cares for each other, that all of our children and grandchildren will remember us fondly when they are resident with her.
Frozen. Oh no. We'll come back, but Ken, is there anything you'd like to add?
So I'll tell you a short story about my hope. When I first moved to Alaska, I experienced winter time and the darkness here as very oppressive. And it was hard for me to adjust to the long, dark periods. And I look forward to the summer like we have now with all the light. A few, maybe 10 years ago, I had a flip in the way I saw things. And I have come now to value the dark winters as the most precious time because it's the time when I can see the stars. And when I see the stars and how big this universe is and how tiny our small planet is that we inhabit, I find comfort and hope in that the troubles that we face are really not very significant in the whole scheme of things, that we're connected to something so much beyond us that what we need to do then is to appreciate and have purpose for why in the world we're here. And I recently became acquainted with a book written by the philosopher Cicero in 44 BC on how to grow old. And if you've never read it, it's incredibly beautiful. And he says we should be content with whatever time we are given to live. An actor does not need to remain on stage throughout a play. It is enough that he appears in the appropriate acts. And so we come to an appreciation of the value of each life, of the time of each life, of the place of each life, that it has infinite value beyond anything we can see. And that's hope.
Thank you. Is there anything that any of you would like to share before we open it up for question and answers?
One thing, when I was growing up in the village of Saxman, I thought that was my community. And the teachings of my grandmother urged me to expand that, to understand what she understood. Now that I know our client houses are all over the place, I hate to say it, but you're all my relatives. And I'm yours. And I don't hate to say it. I really relish saying that now. And it's taken a long time for me to understand what my grandmother knew. And I'm grateful to have learned these lessons before I lost the rest of my hair. With that said, Guneshish, thank you, Helen, for setting this up, and I thank the organization for inviting me.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I'd like to thank Taylor and Menica, who allowed me to facilitate this conversation tonight. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or send them in the chat box. For any and all of our panelists. Looks like some resources are being shared. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you, our panelists, for being here. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives. Next Wednesday at the same time tonight, we will be having a reflection discussion. If any of you would like to come and discuss things that you learned tonight or share from your own experiences, I encourage you to attend. We'll be sending the Zoom link out to everyone who is registered, and it's also available on the Facebook page. And the resources are, I guess that's a link to a resources doc, correction. But thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. If nobody, last chance for questions, guys.
I'm looking forward to seeing you on YouTube, Richard.
We start working. We'll have to figure out how to do that myself, but we're gonna get there.
All right, let's all get together for a double shot of Diet Coke on the rocks.
Ellen, thank you for facilitating, and Lo, if you're still on, thank you for reaching out to me. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Thank you to the speakers. My name is Ann Stepton. I live in Juneau and just came across this the other day on Facebook, and I'm really glad I joined. It was nice to hear your perspectives, and just I work for the elders program for my tribe, and just listening to you guys talk really has affirmed that we are all one huge community going through the same thing, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Brianna, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Have a good night.
bye.